Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chart Chat number 58. We're excited to dive in today on charts that confuse us and might confuse you. So, without any further ado, let's kick off Chart Chat. I'm Amanda McCulloch, and I'm excited to be joining you all here today to talk about charts that might confuse us, as well as a quick lightning round, and we'll dive into our agenda for the day shortly. But before we do that, I'd love to go ahead and give an opportunity for my co-hosts to introduce themselves. We are missing one of our co-hosts today, Steve Wexler, who couldn't join us, though I'm sure he would bring endless heckling and opportunities for us to think more about speed to insight, which is always what Steve asks us to think about on our charts and graphs. Jeff, you want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah, Jeff Schaefer here in Cincinnati, Ohio. I am the Perry Professor of Analytics at the University of Cincinnati and the Director of the Applied AI Lab. Andy?
Excellent. And Andy?
I'm Andy Cotgreave. What are my tableaus? Senior Data Evangelist. And front of mind is I'm also the co-host of IronViz, and that's coming up in just 6 weeks, a Tableau conference in San Diego.
Exciting. And I'm Amanda McCulloch. I'm an independent data visualization designer based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I also serve as on the advisory council for the Data Viz Society. And as many of you know, I've been the executive director for DVS for years now, and that is no longer my primary title. So I'm excited to have transitioned that mantle of leadership, but to continue to support DVS behind the scenes in many different ways. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in today to charts that confuse us. And for those of you who are new to Chart Chat, it's more than just chit chat, it's Chart Chat, where we dive into all kinds of interesting, very detailed conversations on the nerdy parts of charts and graphs. We encourage you to join our debates. You can always go ahead and add comments on YouTube or on LinkedIn, and we sometimes like to bring those up and chat about them as we go. I think today should generate a lot of conversation because nothing gets the Data Viz community more riled up than perhaps slightly less than typical chart types. So excited to have you all dive into that conversation with us today. Today's topics include three key things. So one, what makes a chart confusing? Considerations when determining what chart to use with Andy. Then we're each going to run through some different charts that we've seen confuse us or confuse our clients in the past, as well as some alternates for what those charts could be reimagined as. And a lightning round where we'll talk about plots without numbers and the debate about the New York Times opinion columnist graphic. If you don't know what we're talking about, I think you'll want to stick around because it's an interesting conversation about where we create charts that appear to have data behind them, but maybe not. So I hope that you'll stick around to join us today for that conversation. As we go ahead and we dive into our topics today, we're also excited to go ahead and have a chance to chat with you all in the after party after Chart Chat. We always hold 30 minutes afterwards to have everyone get together. You can share some more charts that confuse you. So we hope that you'll stick around for the after party. And with that, Andy, why don't you go ahead and kick us off and tell us about just how confusing it was to define confusion.
It turns out, like everything in this field, it's never quite as easy as you expect. So those watching, tell us, what is a confusing chart? Which charts confuse you? I'm going to pick a few and talk about how I think one can measure confusion from the terms of a data analyst trying to make useful charts. So there are three ways I'm going to talk about the ways we can measure confusion. The first is some charts are confusing because they take a long time to learn. The fundamental principle of the chart itself is time consuming to understand. Then your end users, they've learned how to use that chart. They come back to the chart 6 months later and they're like, oh, they have to remember what they learned. How long does it take to get back on page with the chart they build? And then finally, even if they know how to read the chart, how long does it take to parse or understand the contents and insights within the chart itself? So I think if these are too big, we end up in confusion. And with all visualizations, of course, they all kind of confuse to different levels. But I think this is useful. So let's consider 6 different chart types that confuse. We've got the connected scatter plot, Sankey diagram, chord diagram. They're at the top. We know whether they're confusing. Radar charts. You'll see later, I have a soft spot for radar charts. Marginal histograms. Steve isn't here. I'm going to rubbish them. He's not here to heckle me back. and jitter plots, a chart that surprisingly generated a bit more debate than we suspected in the writing of dashboards that deliver. The meeting invite from the email didn't work. Right. Sorry for those who had meeting invite issues. But those of you who made it, well done. All right. So how do we measure chart confusion? So I think we've got how long does it take to learn? How long does it take to remember? And then we can size each one of these dots according to how long it takes to understand the chart when you've got back. So I'm going to start off by moving the jitter plot. So here's the jitter plot, right? I'm not going to explain what these chart types are. Hopefully you know what they are. How long does it take to learn what a jitter plot is? Not very long. And I will say at this point that we did have a bit of a debate when writing dashboards that deliver about how confusing a jitter plot is. I've certainly come across a bunch of people who are confused by this random y-axis. They infer meaning from it, and so they don't really understand it. But the good news is it takes very little time to learn. It takes very little time to learn how to use a jitter plot. And then when you come back to one, you kind of know what they are. You only need to learn that once. And so therefore, the time to understand one of these is also really pretty small. So I'm going to put it about here in the bottom left. Radar plots. Where do we think a radar plot is? Amanda, how long do you think it takes to learn how to do a radar chart? And I know you're going to talk about these in a minute. So
I don't know. I think time to learn how to read it or to learn how to create it.
Read it. I'm talking about consumption. Yeah, right. I'm talking about chart consumption here.
I think it probably takes maybe 2 minutes to make sense of it.
2 minutes. So I'm going to say that's about here, right, on my non-scaling thing. And then time to remember. The thing about coming back to a radar chart, you probably remember quite quickly that it's got these weird spokes and the distances. But the challenge is it takes quite a long time to actually understand what is going on, right? These things, you've got to look at each of the individual spokes to remember what they are. So I'm putting this one, easy to learn, easy to remember, quite hard to pass. I'm going to leave chord diagrams till later. Let's do marginal histograms, Steve's favorite. Again, I don't think they take very long to learn. I don't think they take a lot of time to remember, but I do think they, again, take a moderate amount of time to pass because of you're looking to the left and be like, what does this mean, right? And you've got to look all the way over here and then make the link between the dots and the histogram itself. So pretty confusing. Sankey diagrams, harder to learn than radar charts, I believe. Easy to remember, but actually, I think easier to understand, right? Once you've learned how to use a Sankey diagram, I think they are quicker to read, therefore smaller on the scatter plot than a radar chart. Finally, Jeff, where should I put a chord diagram? I know you're a fan. How long to learn a chord diagram?
I think that takes some time.
Yeah. And what about remembering them when you've come back to a chord diagram after a while?
I don't think that's so bad, but probably more than a Sankey diagram.
Yeah, I think I'd hear. And how long to understand a chord diagram when you open one for the first time?
I think that takes a while too.
Yeah. So don't anybody ding me for my completely arbitrary data measurement here using size random info. Right, and then finally, the connected scatter plot. I think we're going to mention these later. This connected scatter plot is a segment of the famous New York Times one. And, you know, connected scatter plots are amazing. They take a really long time to learn. When you encounter a connected scatter plot, they take a really long time to remember what the hell you're looking at. And they are by far the monster of understanding. In this example, if anybody remembers this one, it shows the relationship between car safety policies and accidents. This little loop was a masterpiece of insight. But to unlock that piece of insight as a reader probably took 2 to 3 to 4 minutes, even if you know what a connected scatter plot is. So I think this is kind of a scale of confusion. Amanda, Jeff, any comments? Am I right or wrong on these measures?
Well,
David seems to think that your chart is confusing.
Yeah, your scatter plot makes the list too, so you got to your scatter plot. Where's that go on here?
Having X and Y unrelated to size.
It's funny. It's like a very standard bubble chart, actually. But
Yeah, really, it's like confusing, right? Like,
right?
yeah.
Hang on. Am I wrong? It's like more time to learn is here, more time to remember is here, and size by understand. Maybe I didn't explain my metrics correctly. Maybe that was unconfusing.
I mean, I think you've just got 3 dimensions there, Andy, and that makes sense. So
yeah.
But speaking to like time to learn, right? I mean, maybe that kind of component of trying to think about and parse an additional piece of information from a size legend, gets confusing to folks. So
yeah, indeed. So yes, here is my confusing chart about a confusing chart. Indeed. Thank you, Desiree. And Mark Bradbourne, where's the little comment you made? Should have been a bar chart. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Oh, sorry. So we're both trying to show at the same time. Yes. Probably could have been. I could have made it a parallel set, actually. I was thinking about making parallel sets, but that would have got too confusing. Anyway,
a certain amount of precision in bar charts, though, Mark. I don't know that these are really precise metrics. These are Andy metrics that Andy has approximated from his own understanding.
Let's step back from critiquing Andy Cotgreave, 20 years of experience as a data storyteller. Let's avoid that today. I'm feeling vulnerable today. I need confidence boosting. The point being, however you measure these metrics, as a data storyteller, when you're thinking, how am I communicating information to my audience, right? How much time are they going to have and dedicate to learning the chart, looking at the chart you build, right? In a rapid fire business dashboard, you've got to have the charts that are easy to learn, easy to remember, and quick to understand. If you're doing dense data journalism along the stars of Georgia Lupi, with an audience who are ready to consume and read a chart and spend time consuming it, then perhaps you can go up here. I mean, connected scatterplots, they are always confusing. Chord diagrams, I think, are amazing. They're absolutely wonderful charts. And then certainly in radar charts, there's examples back there. So our job as data storytellers is to think about these metrics whenever we choose a chart. As anecdotes, when I first started building dashboards, I loved putting really complicated charts on dashboards because I wanted to show my audience how good I was at using Tableau. But what I didn't realize in those days is that actually being good at using Tableau doesn't make you a good data communicator. It's about choosing the metrics. So there we go.
All right. Well, let's dive into our 5 charts of the day. I think we've got 5 charts. Feel free to go ahead and add your thoughts on if there are charts we're missing. Also, feel free to join us at the after party to chat more about your missing charts. So
yeah,
radar charts, I'll kick off, are ones that I feel like a very gut personal instinct because I'm sent back to Botswana when I think about radar charts, actually, for reasons that will become immensely apparent in about 5 slides. So back when I was working on global health projects, specifically on health informatics, we did a lot of data quality monitoring and auditing. And I put this little flow diagram up there that what we were doing is looking and seeing kind of how much did aggregated reports at the national or district level match what was happening in lower levels. So going and actually counting how many things happened on a set of records. And I worked on these routine data quality assessment tool things. We collected a lot of data, assessing kind of how many different medicines got dispersed, people were seen, things like that, that helped us assess what the actual kind of primary source information was. And all that data was collected all the way up to these dashboards. Do these look like dashboards that we all remember from back in the day? These beautiful Excel macro-enabled dashboards. I was handed this as a project to go ahead and work on developing training materials around this dashboard. And the content of it, you could go into the details of data quality metrics for days. But what stuck out to me when I first saw this dashboard, when I was first being brought onto this team, was why is there one radar chart and then a whole set of different bar charts? And no one could give me a good answer to the question. They said, well, we just wanted something different. Because we felt like we shouldn't just have 5 bar charts. And that's not a great reason to make a chart design decision. And so as we went ahead and we were working on training and making training materials, we made a number of different kind of training materials in writing, as well as in a book, or as well as in the training materials themselves that we delivered live with the National Department of Health in Botswana around reading this radar or spider chart and all the ways in which it was plotted, all of the ways it was created. And when doing the training live and going through and plotting and showing how the radar chart was made, We constantly had people ask us in the trainings, why is this not a bar chart? This doesn't make sense to me. And so as I think about radar charts, these radar charts showed up in a very similar pattern across all three dashboards at different levels. Let's not judge the bar charts and the data quality, the data visualization quality on these charts. The point being that these radar charts were added for kind of something different rather than for analytical value only. And when we think about how and why we add different charts and chart types into data visualizations or dashboards, it's not a great reason to do that, because then we didn't have a good answer to the folks at the NDOH in Botswana on why these radar charts existed. In a very different looking radar chart, the Data Visualization Society logo is actually made of a series of 3 overlapping radar charts. It is a data-driven logo, actually. We can update the shape of the actual DVS logo based on the configuration of the people within our organization at a given point in time. And this looks very different from these, right? But it's the same chart type, and it's plotted the same way in terms of how we actually build out the plot for our radar chart. It's just had all of the axes scrubbed away to make it more artistic than analytical. And I will say out the gate that I think one of the utilities of radar charts can be building these more artistic shapes of data, which is one kind of space of value. The logo is actually made by going ahead and collecting data on people's self-rated skills on 9 different dimensions of data visualization around data, the collection, cleaning, and analysis of data, visualization, design, storytelling, and building or developing data viz, and the society component of leadership management and community building. And so you can see that there are actually kind of 5 marks as you look across the axes. Again, the axis labels are scrubbed down here, but the radar charts themselves are created by plotting a given value or number along that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scale, and then going ahead and connecting those 3 points and filling in the center. You'll see radar charts that both fill in the center and don't, in terms of different ways of displaying that data. But the DVS logo is then created by superimposing the shape of those 3 different triangles on top of each other. And one might say, in classic Andy Cotgreave fashion, well, it should have been a bar chart, right? We could have built a bar chart of what the shape of the DVS looks like. But I imagine that when we were sending out our data-driven badges at the beginning of DVS, where each person got their own DVS star, that if we sent out your own DVS bar chart, we would not have seen people get nearly as excited or engaged with what those topics and what they looked like. And so as we think about the alternates to radar charts give us a lot of similar information to what a bar chart can give us, but with a little bit of a couple nuances in how we read them and some challenges in interpretation and a little bit less kind of precision in terms of that single, easy to read aligned scale. If we actually took this same data and we put it onto a classic kind of radar chart without overlapping the sections, we would go ahead and we would create an axis for each, a kind of a section or axis for each of the different categories that we're looking at: the collection, cleaning, and analysis of data, design, storytelling, and building of data visualization, and leadership management or community. And you can see here more clearly with the labels how those different points are plotted to showcase what some individual skill set looks like. As we go ahead and look at that, the ordering of these categories is in a somewhat arbitrary order, grouping or clustering them by the individual kind of macro level categories. And it creates a specific kind of shape of what that overall spider or web looks like. We can fill that in and fill it in and create even a more distinct shape, which forces you to focus a little bit less on the individual points and more on the shape itself. And then we took and iterated on that. And instead of actually making a single kind of connected plot where all 9 pieces were connected, we used the 3 overlapping triangles to create a better sense of how those 3 different pieces of information were connected together. And this creates a very nice kind of aesthetic, artistic visualization that we were able to then develop into a set of custom badges showing someone's kind of shape of their data in their Data Viz Society logo. This is a really, again, more artistic way of using a radar chart, and one that I think works really well because it can be combined into lots of small spaces. And the goal is not precision necessarily. We're looking at kind of an overall comparison of someone having more skills in the community or society dimensions, the purple, compared to their skills in the data collection or design spaces. But as we go ahead and dig into what the challenges are around radar charts, it's nice to look at some other examples that perhaps use kind of more quantitative data. I think Flourish has a really great blog that dives into these radar or spider charts in a bit more detail with some interactivity. You can see they've gone ahead and looked at player ratings in terms of position, but the position a player plays, and then their various different skill sets in different areas. And if you zoom in on any one of these individual radar charts, I'm not personally a big football fan, so I'm not going to go into details on what the shape of these mean. But you can see the overlapping kind of shapes of different scales of what the team's strengths are. And one place where radar charts can be useful, and I've used them in public health as well, is to go ahead and compare kind of the relative shapes of a number of different small units in a very confined space. They're very compact. That's a good thing. But they also come with some different challenges. So one, the shapes can be distorted by the ordering of the categories. So if you look at two different ordering of categories, you can see that just by reshaping the order in which those axes are plotted, you dramatically change what the shape is. And you focus more because of the fill on the shape than focusing on the actual comparison of the values. You also have the issue that we're not great at comparing the area of shapes. So the radar chart on the left is twice as big as the radar chart on the right, but the average score is only 40% higher. And so as you think about the ways in which we are challenged in our visual perception and interpretation of information, I think that remembering that when we're filling in the space on that radar chart, we're trying to imply some kind of value and some kind of meaning in the space, the size, the shape, the area. And we have to be cautious about what that actually means when we're comparing various different units, whether it's in a pair or across more of a small multiple view. So radar charts, do I love them? No. Do I love them enough and have enough of a soft spot for them that my mind has been changed from my days of being asked in Botswana, why is this a radar chart? This makes no sense, and spending an hour plotting it and drawing it and trying to explain it, and then transitioning it into a information award-winning shortlisted piece of work for DVS? I don't know. Andy, I know you love radar charts, though. So
I love radar charts. And in fact, we've got a couple of people who are alluding to the same reason I love radar charts. So Shiv, Gaming Stats, I think Shri as well, Sports and Gaming Data. So let's just first of all, right? I love radar charts, but there's something aesthetically beautiful about the DVS bar chart. If that had been the output, we could have, if you collapsed those bars a bit, it could have worked. But I love the DVS radar chart. Genuinely, I think it's a really, really smart piece of.
You lose the whole visual metaphor of a star, Andy. What would we call this?
I am joshing. It is a marvelous logo. So the reason I have a soft spot for radar charts is from a shoot 'em up, an indie game shoot 'em up called Warning Forever. So somebody, please tell me somebody on your watching has played this game. Came out about, I don't know, 15 years ago. In it, all you had to do was defeat bosses, but each boss would get bigger and bigger. They'd take about 2 minutes to defeat. And depending on how you killed the previous boss, the next boss would be stronger in the way you to defend against the way you killed it the first time. So in each level, at the start of each level, you are seeing a radar chart where each spoke determines the strength of that thing. And as you go, strength of the boss you're about to face, this is low res. But as you go through the thing, through the levels, the boss gets bigger and the radar chart spreads out. The reason the radar chart was so successful here is you are seeing one of these charts every 2 minutes. And if you're playing the game for half an hour or an hour, you're seeing these radar charts to the point that you just know what the spokes mean. And literally the shape of that orange blob tells you what you're about to face. And I think lots of the comments have alluded to this. You alluded to it as well, Amanda. Familiarity is another metric of confusion that can alleviate a potentially confusing chart type. I must have seen 600, 700, 800 of these in all the time I played Warning Forever, and it just became something I understood. So so there you go. That's why I've forever had a soft spot for radar charts, because of.
Well, I love this question about what about radar charts with bars, like a radial bar chart, which we see built in different ways and shapes and forms. We can pull up an example if people aren't familiar with what those look like. But I would say one of the challenges with radial bar charts is that they're not a default chart type in a lot of tools. And so building them gets complicated. So the other question I often ask about these more obscure chart types is the juice worth the squeeze on the time it's going to take me to build it, right? Like, is that worthwhile as a developer? Is that worth my time to build out that radial bar chart and what that looks like? So that would be one kind of piece of confusion for some folks. I'll pull up example of that while I'm doing that. Jeff, did you have some thoughts on radar charts on your side?
Well, I think there's some key things that you guys mentioned along the way. I mean, in Amanda's beautiful introduction of that, she mentioned the word accuracy, right? So how accurate do we have to be in our comparisons? So, if you go back to the research in data viz in the, 80s and Cleveland McGill, that we were measuring time and accuracy. And Andy's graphic was really focused on time, right? Time to learn, time to understand it. And the other component is accuracy, like how accurate is your interpretation of the data. And so to me, this goes back to the fundamental purpose, the user, what is being used, how accurate does it need to be? And if you're in a dashboard for, Botswana or whatever it might be, then, you might need better accuracy and, a bar chart might be the preferred thing. If you're in a game console and you need a quick just look and you don't need to be super accurate, you just need to gauge it, then maybe that's an easy read once you learn how to do that. I think the other key that was mentioned in the comments is the order. And if you are trying to create a radar chart in a game, you have to set that order and never change it, right? Because if you ever change the order of that, then now all of a sudden your interpretation of it is instantly gone. You've learned that power is always in the top left-hand, corner. And if all of a sudden I move it to the bottom right, I've just completely blown away the use of that. So it's kind of set it once and keep it. And that's another sort of constraint that you have to work with, I feel. And then as Amanda rightly pointed out, the order also matters. In in a bar chart, you might order most to least, right? Easy to read and puts things in context. In a radar chart, you may not, because you need to keep that order consistent to, for readability, I guess.
Well, and here's this for a quick look for anyone who's not familiar, a radial bar chart, a really simple example from that same Flourish article, focuses on, instead of actually plotting the points and then drawing and creating the spider web, going out and drawing the line across that. So you get that kind of basic star shape in a different way. And you'll see a lot of examples of those used in Iron Viz submissions and other things like that, Andy. I think people love playing with them and using the tutorials out there to do them in Tableau. But, you have to appreciate that, some tools make that a little bit harder. So, we'll see here that the advantage to Power BI is that you have to use normal charts. Is that an advantage? I don't know. Pains me sometimes.
The other question is, what's the alternative, right? Like in that example you just showed, it's what is the advantage of being in a circle versus just on a linear bar chart, right? It's just a visual effect, I guess.
Visual interest. Anywho, we can debate the merits of visual interest versus precision for days. Jeff,
sorry, I wanted so Heather asked any suggestions for business use cases. So I think we've slightly alluded to some. I remember the other reason I switched from disliking them to liking them was, I think it was this paper from 2016, but they showed that in healthcare, when doctors and healthcare practitioners are looking at these things regularly, I mean, this is Amanda's use case, right? They become able to read these things, and the shape itself communicates things they need to know. And I always thought that was a very useful use case. And that paper, I think it was this paper, sort of showed that value.
I use it for comparing metrics across in a healthcare setting as well, across different subpopulations. So if you're looking at information by race and ethnicity, for example, you can plot a panel of a lot of radar charts in a small amount of space that kind of contains one space. It's less good for comparing across groups, but you can superimpose the spider web shape of the average values and see what is the shape that's bigger or smaller than what those averages are. So that can be helpful as well. Jeff, let's go on to one of my least favorite charts in the world, the Violin plot.
Wow, this is below radar charts then.
I'm like I said, I have this like back and forth relationship with radar charts. Violin plots, I just, I don't love them.
I think Amanda gave it to me because she hates it. I don't know. I think Amanda hates the first one I have, and I think Andy might dislike the second one I have. I'm not sure. I always love Amanda putting just a word or two on a blank slide and make it look pretty. And so I did that, but then I was like, I wonder what Gen AI thinks a violin plot looks like. And so I just put it in and just to see what it could do, and tries to make it look a little bit like a violin plot, I guess. I don't know, but I thought it was interesting what Gen AI came up with. So with that, let's dive in. You know, box plots could have been on the list for confusing, right? I don't know that I would use a box plot for a general audience with trying to explain things. I think a line in the middle, like a median, or the interquartiles, I think you could, you know, say 50% of the people are in the box. That's probably easily explainable. But when you get to these whiskers that are on the outside and you have to tell somebody it's 1.5 times IQR, their eyes glaze over and you have to explain what does 1.5 times IQR mean. And so I think that's, you know, that in itself probably could have been a topic, but a violin plot goes further, right? It shows almost a distribution on each side in this case. And we'll talk about whether it's mirrored or whether it's a comparison. But then inside, you could also show, you know, the same thing that a box plot would show. Like you could add in there the dot or line in the middle to show, you know, half and half. You could show your interquartiles there, and you could say 50% are in a box. That's all fine. Now, it uses this thing called, you know, kernel density estimator, and that's where I think you're going to lose people, just like 1.5 times IQR. It's like, okay, now I got to explain what a kernel density is, right? And I asked ChatGPT just again, go back to Gen AI, explain this in a very simple way, right? It's smoothing a curve to shape your data. So if you could explain that to people and say, this is just kind of the shape of your data. If you had a bunch of people with different heights in a room and you're trying to show a distribution, okay, well then what does each data point mean? If you put a data point, well, it's not a person with a height, it's an estimator, right? It's smoothing. It creates this small bump around each person and then kind of adds up the bumps to create this distribution shape. And so that's what we have. Now, I think there's some interesting things. I am not necessarily a fan of a violin plot when it just mirrors the left side and right side, because I don't think that adds any value. But if you were trying to make a comparison of, say, men versus women in a cohort, it really could show, hey, men really fall in this part of the distribution versus women really spread out across a longer portion of the distribution. Like in this instance on Sunday and Smoker, the male is spread out really wide, but the female is clustered together. If you're familiar with, you know, kurtosis, right? You're seeing, you know, some statistical difference here in the distribution. Again, is that going to be hard to explain to an average user? Probably. But if you just need to get a general sense of the distribution, I think it could help. You could add things to this, right? Like you could put I don't know, rug plot is like a strip plot in there. You could do a jitter inside with your dots to show the distribution. And then somebody mentioned in the comments a bee swarm. So you could actually plot dots inside and show two different distributions of people inside of this. And I think that would help. But again, to me, now, why am I mirroring the left side of the distribution and the right side of the distribution? That doesn't add any value to me. Why not just show a single side as a distribution? And so I don't know for if I'm going to use it, I think I'd probably use it when I'm comparing two distributions rather than just mirroring the left side and right side. Interesting. I found this on Twitter. Somebody was doing a paper, and I love violin plots, but my reviewer is concerned their novelty might distract from the message. Is there a better alternative to clarify? And then this thread just blows up on Twitter, and people, probably DataViz community people, they're like, well, first off, you know, letter A. Violin plots are not novel. They've been around for 23 years, right? They were invented in 1997. There's nothing new about this. It's an extension of, you know, John Tukey's box plot, right? Provide an overview and summary. Even the raw data itself might not show. Well, that's true, right? Like it does give a view of a distribution that just plotting these things. So somebody else said, hey, how about a jittered points and a rain cloud plot? And I thought that was interesting because that is really a favorite of mine. This is the famous iris data set, if you're familiar, but this is what we call a rain cloud plot, or a variation on it, I guess. But now if violin plots are not confusing, have I really made this confusing? I don't know. You have your distribution, now you have a box plot, and you have these dots underneath it to show the distribution. I have to say, I like this, knowing how to read it. I like this better than a violin plot, because rather than mirroring the left side and right side, I have more data, right? It gives me other information about the distribution that I don't get from just the top. And one of my favorites, love this, penguins, 3 different types here. You'll see the distribution, and again, in this rain cloud plot, it has the dots, jittered dots underneath it. It has this box plot to show the spread, and it really is interesting here, especially like whoever that penguin is. I mean, the Shaquille O'Neal of penguins or something is like he's in a completely different class of his own. I guess it's the Pinocchio of penguins, right? Because it's a bill, so it's the bill ratio. So the Pinocchio of penguins there, I don't know. So I thought that was fun. Amanda, should I go on to the next one, or should I?
Well,
I have a question.
Talk about how we feel about these alternates, I suppose. Andy, did you have thoughts on your sentiment about violin plots? Since I've made mine very boldly apparent. I'm with Mark here. It's like a joke. If it takes it much explanation, it's probably not worth it.
Oh, wow.
Thanks, Mark.
But I would counter that to say a chord diagram, and even Minard's chart takes explanation, and I don't think they're jokes. I think they're both very useful charts. I guess, Jeff, aside from on this one there is the distribution box, but I'd argue that on this and the previous slide, what is the jitter adding that isn't? You're saying there's extra information, but I'm like, is there? Isn't it just the same? But
the dots, I mean, if you didn't jitter the dots, then I wouldn't be able to see all the points.
No,
so
but
I can see the distribution of those points, right?
But I can kind of see the distribution from the area chart above, right?
Sure, but I don't is that 1 point? Okay, so let's go over here. Is that if I didn't have the dot down here, is that little mark 1 point, 2 points? Did I have 2 outliers? Did I have 3 outliers? You don't really know how many make up that, right? You have to, and here I can see how far to the left. Is that 1 point? Is it 2 points? Is it 3 points? So I think that's what you get with these. By the way, if this is interactive, I could also, hover over it and see the name of the penguin and get other details, right? So it gives me a more precise interaction with it too, with having the points.
I guess that answer comes back down to so many things. It's like without the dots, I can see that in the extreme of chin straps, there is very few at that extreme. And if all the agents needs to know is very few, then that's fine, right? But if they need to know exactly how many, you have to give them that information as well.
Yeah, there's a variation. I'll go further. If anybody's familiar with Daniel Zvinka, I absolutely adore his work. I know Steve would sing his praises and always enjoy seeing his work. And there's a wonderful play to this that Daniel went down the path of trying all kinds of different things on this blog post. And what he ended up doing is something called a dot density plot. It's very similar. Each dot is not, again, we're back to kernel densities in here. And so this is not something that's going to be easy in Tableau or Power BI or something like that. He's coding to do this. I think he did it in C++ or something. But anyway, it is an interesting way of showing the distribution of that data in getting kind of the combination of both, right? You get sort of the sense of how many people are in an area, but you also get the overall distribution of that. This was viz he did on Elon Musk's former Twitter activity and the age variation of Congress over time. And I thought this was really interesting, right? The size of Congress has gotten bigger, but the age has really spread and gotten older. So yeah, something a line chart would tell you the average, but doesn't really tell you, the oldest or the youngest, how far it goes. So I thought this was a really interesting use case of that.
My brain wants this to be rotated horizontally. My brain is going, that kind of distribution should be horizontally. And then my brain goes,
but it's time series.
Time is on the x-axis, so it's fine. I've got this like fight going on in my head going, it's oriented wrong and right at the same time.
You know what disorients me about this, actually, and I still like it, is the flat side of it versus just like a clustered bee swarm or a jitter makes me feel like there's something different or weird about it. It makes me think of bees and like a beehive that's like been built on the side of a building.
Yeah.
Anywho, we are kind of running through all of these and taking way more time than we thought for each of our individual charts. So wanting to make sure we don't miss out on the joys of the chord diagram, Andy, I think we can hop over to the chord diagram and talk about our chords.
Guess what? I haven't got a chord diagram. Let's go to connected scatterplots. Sorry.
What was that?
I haven't got a chord diagram after.
Oh, I thought you had a beloved chord diagram. Well, Jeff.
That was the plan, but life got in the way. And you just
you were singing its praises with such enthusiasm when we were prepping for this episode. Anyways, maybe we'll bring it up in the after party if people choose to join us for some impromptu content. Jeff, you had one more as well. Do you want to pop over to your last chart type?
I do. I have one that we'll call the upset plot. If anybody has seen that, again, that's Gen AI's interpretation of an upset plot. I thought in some respect it got some things right there, but sort of odd depiction of it. This came up because the Data Viz Society put out a report for their 2024, and it used this upset plot. And I thought I love upset plots. I think Andy was confused about it, or I won't speak for Andy. You're on here, Andy, so you can say whether you dislike it or not. But I do like it. And just so we understand how to read that upset plot, we have some aspects of how we use AI in data visualization. The survey asked questions and people responded. The bar chart on the left-hand side, marginal, by the way, probably one of the reasons Andy might not like it, but a marginal histogram or marginal bar chart, you have data prep and cleaning as the number one answer, right? Family Feud, top 10 on the board. Number one answer is data prep and cleaning. That's how we're using AI and data analysis. Then you have combinations of things between it. Like, what if you use AI for data prep and cleaning and data analysis? Well, then you have the connection in the upset plot. You have the connection of those two, and that marginal histogram up top tells you that is the most. So you have the most using those two, and then so on. The next one is just for people doing other visualization tasks. The next one is just data prep and cleaning, and so on. And so there's been some wonderful examples of this. In fact, Storytelling with Data, January of 24, had Upskill with Upsets, and people created a bunch of these. We'll put the link in the comments there. But one of my favorites from there was Ben Dakin. I don't know how to pronounce that. 41% of schools are below the average. This beautiful sort of hand sketch looking math, reading, and writing. Individually, math is number one, reading is number two, but if you put all three together, that's the biggest deficiency. If you put math and reading together, that's the second biggest, and so on. Then I found a research paper, and I love this because it really shows how these intersections work. A lot of advanced charting in this research paper. It's really kind of crazy. I mean, number one, they break the axis in here, which is like, wow, okay. Then they added a Venn diagram to kind of show all the different interactions between these things and how they could occur. And then you have the bar chart single, and then you have the connected, in the upset plot. Now, I couldn't help myself. I had to do a little quick redesign of this because the colors on the left bar chart were kind of like, why didn't you match the categories? So I just had to fix that before I dive into it. I'm like, all right, I'm going to fix that. But yes. So over here are individually, and you can see, they kind of match in here. This one yellow one is off the charts with 19,000. Everything else is really, really low numbers, hence the reason they broke their bar chart. But I really love what they did. And then, like Andy, I went down the path. I'm like, well, what do you do with the other bar charts? I mean, do you try to color them? You could color the ones that are individual to match. But then what do you do when you have two or three intersecting colors? Do you try to divide your bar chart up with colors. I'm like, I don't think you could get away with that. So I kind of bailed on that. I'm like, that's not going to work, and try to explain the intersections of how these things work. But anyway, that's an upset plot. And yeah.
I think you're trolling. I think you're trolling us because you added something with a broken axis in it. The punning is going great in the chats today, guys. Thank you so much for all of the great puns that we have coming back. So I will say that I think that there's a lot of value in looking at the ways in which you can put a lot of information in an upset plot. I love that Desiree says it feels like Christmas. Let me go ahead and keep looking at it. But at the same time, Jen commented that I have to remind myself to read them, which comes back, Andy, I think, to your initial point on not just kind of how easy is it to learn how to read, but how much do we build a mental model that we can reuse when we're reading things. So a radar chart, because you kind of have that model of a bar chart in your head, I feel like, and you're just reimagining it into a circle with a little bit different shape. I'm anchoring somewhere, but upset plots may be more complex.
Yeah, I think, Jeff, can you just share your screen again? Because I think
this one.
Yeah, I've never really encountered them, so I don't have super strong opinions. But I guess if you go back to the one with the maths, the sort of hand-drawn one about the maths in Swindon, right? That one, right? So I guess my challenge is the left to right ordering of the possible combinations of each of the entities is really hard to pass. So in this case, it's fine because the one on the left is all three. That's fine. But if you now go forward to the horrific thing with the Venn diagram, thus revealing my opinion, right? Now it's really hard to find, well, where's the one where all four are, or just 1, 2, and 5, right? It's really hard to, if you're looking for a particular combination, it's quite hard to do that. You can do it. It's just time consuming. So I'm putting myself in the intrigued camp for upset plots.
Well, when I thought about like the uses of this, you think about I was thinking about a remake of like the famous Fox News pie chart, right? That they did survey data, and it's like probably the worst pie chart ever done because it adds up to 193%. But it's like, oh, somebody backs one candidate, but they also might back another candidate.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, well, the most single candidate is on the left side with the bar chart. The most of the combinations of candidates is up on the top. And so really what the advantage of this chart, and I don't know an alternative to how I would show it, is you can show the single quantities comparing one to the other, but you can also show the combinations, right? Like 1 and 3, 1 and 5, 1, 2, and 3. And what is the most popular? Like if somebody buys a burger, do they typically get fries and a drink? And so like basket analysis, I don't know how else you would show it without doing some kind of combination like this.
Yeah, agree.
Learnable, but maybe not the easiest. Well, we've got one more chart type and then one lightning round left. Do you think we can dive into them both in the next 13 minutes?
I think so.
Let's give it a go. All right, so connected scatter plots. We've actually covered this before on Chart Chat 13, and we'll put a reference to that as well if you want to dive deeper. The connected scatter plot that was brought up at the very beginning of this talk when Andy was doing this was this one from the New York Times, looking at that from their science section. And connected scatter plots can be confusing to parse and read because it looks kind of like a line chart, like it should be time series, but it's not. That's where I get confused because you can see as you zoom in here that the labels show you the various individual years that you're looking at data for in terms of what's happening when, and then you're plotting information on looking at auto fatalities here versus vehicle miles driven. So if you thought that Andy's chart was confusing, his bubble chart, I think this actually gets a little bit more complicated. But with a good set of annotations and an annotation layer and sometimes some animation, they can be effective ways of kind of showing patterns over time. When I was digging in and looking for some of maybe research around connected scatter plots and pieces, I did find that you can make it even more complicated when looking at paired time series data in terms of looking at two different series together. You can actually play with these kind of interactive pieces that allow you to go ahead and drag and drop and move things in terms of what this looks like as you look at what happens on two separate charts. It's worth kind of playing with this, and I'll put a link to the chat without diving into it in too much depth. But as we think about kind of what these connected scatter plots look like, Jeff had brought up early on when we were talking about these that one of Hans Rosling's charts is one of the ones that you actually said you thought was one of the most memorable of the connected scatter plots. Do you want to speak for a moment to that, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the first one that and I've seen this so many times because it's in my class material. So I mean, talk about time to recall. I'm very familiar with this. Hannah Fairfield's. It's gas price and miles driven. But every time I look at it, I have to think about, oh, when it makes that left turn and goes back the other way, it's like, is that less miles driven or is that less gas price, right? I just have to connect to the X and Y axis every time I do it. And then Andy's got a famous one that he, always shows with, online agents and hotels, and it's kind of in this animated form. But the Gapminder one, I thought about, I'm like, well, that's kind of a connected scatter plot. It's like time series data. And in fact, when Moritz Steffener redesigned it for Google Magazine and put it in print, he did connect it with this shading to kind of depict Hans Rosling. And I was thinking to myself, gosh, that works really well. I don't really have to think about it. And I think maybe the answer is just because it's animated, right? Hans Rosling animates it over time, and you see these bubbles moving from the bottom right to the top left. He's explaining it while it's animating, and he's telling the story in front of this, TED audience. And I guess it's also just going in one direction. Vietnam is moving from the bottom right to the top left. It doesn't turn around and go back the other way and make different directions. So that probably helps in part of the story. But anyway, it's just something I was thinking about. It's, I've never used one in practice.
Well, and it sounds like people are having a little bit of trouble seeing your screen, Jeff. So I might just pull mine up real quick to see if that helps. The one that Moritz had recreated looks like this in terms of having the static version of this connected scatter plot. I do think your point on it doesn't double back, Jeff, is a really good one in terms of pattern and direction, right? It still intuitively kind of goes the direction of which I would expect something to go here, kind of going in reverse because fertility rate goes down. But Andy, thoughts from you on connected scatter plots?
Nothing really to add. I mean, I know we're light on time. They're just so hard to pass. I mean, and I'm trying to puzzle why this one isn't, and the New York Times ones are. But I think
I love the observation personally that this thing on fertility rates looks like sperm. It's just able to achieve, perhaps accidentally, perhaps just kind of thinking about it.
An unsated ambition that I've had is to have a competition for somebody to come up with a chart name and then build a chart that fits that metaphor, because we've got sperm charts, comet charts, worm charts, all these things. I was like, just come up with the craziest name and build the chart that fits that now.
Andy, you work at a large data visualization company that happens to run challenges. I feel like this is an opportunity for you.
And increasingly I work for a company that likes to think the really dumb, stupid charts are the best way forward as well. But didn't say that live. So
like this tornado chart.
Yeah, wow, that old beauty. Oh my gosh.
So Chart Chat 13 dives into connected scatter plots in a longer segment if you're interested in learning more about how they get read or about how they're created with some interactive examples. So it does include this beautiful tornado chart, which is probably one of the most egregious examples of connected scatter plots that confuse rather than delight. So as we go ahead and we get to our last 10 minutes of Chart Chat today, we want to try to talk a little bit about charts without numbers for our lightning round. And this is specifically about a chart that popped up and I saw some debate about on Blue Sky, all talking about this chart around 10 columnists and writers rate what mattered in Trump's first full month from the New York Times. I want to note that it's published in the opinion section. It is specifically in the opinion section. And this is initial lead scatter plot, which is going to be the only thing you see if you don't have a paid subscription to the New York Times, I think is also notable, is an aggregate kind of data point where you have an individual point plotted for 10 different issues, for various different issues that were rated on some scale. We don't really know how that data was collected, around positive to negative impact, going left to right, and going north to south or top to bottom on the level of consequence, top being more consequential, less being lower being less. One of the challenges with this chart is that it creates some kind of ethical questions, it seemed, and Francis Gagnon has a really great thread talking about what some of those ethical questions might be. This question about, should we quantify and turn things into a chart? What are the consequences of the chart? If words matter, charts matter too. And one of the key points was that it kind of presents a chart that seems to show that For example, trans issues at the bottom are a less consequential set of policy decisions, and it feels like it pits different issues against each other, which I can see. I also don't totally agree with, and I'm one who typically kind of leans on the side of very cautious, ethical, responsible visualization. This chart made me think of another chart, the Gartner Magic Quadrant that we all love to share around so much, which has various different data points where we've plotted various different software products and put them against each other and plotted them in a way that has completeness of vision, ability to execute, and no actual numbers, right? You assume that Gartner has some numbers underlying these, but we talk about this magic quadrant all the time, and no one seems to have an issue with pitting various different software products against each other. No surprise. But instead, thinking about issues created some more concern. The challenge, I think, the bigger challenge with the New York Times issue chart is that you're aggregating a really small sample here. So aggregating up the opinions of 10 different columnists and invited people into one summary number. And what's really interesting here is the distribution. And that's partially because you can start to see that there's not a lot of agreement, for example, on how different people responded. It's a rather biased sample of 10 people and 10 opinion columnists. And I'm more interested in actually knowing what the perspective of different columnists are, because I might understand kind of how they align more or less with what my perspectives have been on this administration. And you can see that, for example, on Doge, that 2 of the invited conservative commentators are the ones who said it had had a positive impact. And suddenly it starts to kind of make sense that this is more of a set of opinions or perspectives by putting people's faces with them instead of some kind of aggregate assessment that's more rooted in quantitative data. The second big issue I kind of have with these, and I pull up USAID's as the other example, is that the formatting gives a bit of a false sense of precision. There's axes with relative scales, but the grid lines give some appearance of a quantitative measure. And I don't really have a sense of, did they ask for numbers from these folks? Did they ask for some kind of scaled piece that they translated into numbers? How do they actually plot these? And so as we kind of think about this issue chart popping up and this challenge of this chart getting a lot of malignment versus, say, the Gartner Magic Quadrant, another chart without numbers, what are your thoughts, Jeff, Andy? Problematic? Not so problematic? How do we feel about the New York Times issue?
It's the aggregation issue that it's that combo of aggregation without scale that create and aggregating small numbers. I mean, you've nailed the problem here. But I think that other point you raise about also who has access to the full story and who will read the full story, because it's very easy to retweet this in rage or delight, depending on political viewpoints, and yet that is actually not the full story.
When I said that, when I first saw it, I said, I'd rather see this broken out by individual columnists.
Yeah.
And very kindly, Stephanie Turek responded and said, it is there, actually. And even worse, I saw a lot of people sharing just the chart without the link. So I had to go dig and look up and find the article. So as a reminder, if you're sharing and hashing on a chart, please go ahead and include the link to the source article.
Going way back, I probably can't find it. Right when I was doing my confusing charts at the start, Ilya had said, you know, the more you go into the top right, the more you veer into social media charts, right? You know, confusion creates engagement, but it also adds the risk of misinformation, I guess. But I think that's a really astute comment because it's true.
I mean, my first thought was
it's a tricky one, Andy. That makes it sound like it's a good thing.
My first thought was every consulting 4-quadrant report, right? You know, it's like the magic quadrant, but you know, every McKinsey consultant, sometimes it's got a scale, right? It's like some kind of score where it is quantitative, but oftentimes it's qualitative, and it's just like, you know, just like Andy did. It made up, you know, his confusion might not be the same as Amanda's confusion. So if we all plotted those charts, they'd end up in different places. And I think that's the point here, right?
Yeah. So this is a stark reminder, I think, also to remember to think about whether aggregations are meaningful and are useful in terms of information. And if you're a journalist, please be cautious about what you put as your lead chart, unless you're going for the clicks and the confusion. All right, so that wraps us up to the end of Chart Chat number 58. Thank you all so much for joining us today and being part of this conversation about charts that confuse us. As a few spaces where you can find us and connect with us, perhaps in person, we will be at the Tableau conference doing Chart Chat Live, once again, joining all 4 of us in San Diego at the Tableau conference. We're looking forward to seeing many of you there. It was great to see folks there last time. We always bring some Chart Chat swag, and we will also be excited to have a chance to chat more about some of these topics there. Second, Outlier is coming up, the annual Data Viz Society conference. It's in Miami, Florida this year, hosted by Alberto Cairo at University of Miami. Speaker applications are open through March 15th, and the theme is reimagining the world of data viz and how we do our work. So please go ahead and submit a speaker application. Would love to have more folks from across different networks joining us. You can always find more about the Data Viz Society on our website and on our social media feeds. And just so you know, in case you haven't pre-ordered yet, Dashboards That Deliver, we submitted the manuscript. Now we're just in the world of images and permissions and all the other things. The manuscript is with Wiley, so it's really coming, guys. It's now available for pre-order on Amazon, shipping September 2025. So we hope you'll dive in. We're really proud of what the book is, and I think the ways in which it dives into not just what great dashboards look like, but the process for creating them. And for more information on things coming up, you can find more from the Big Book of Dashboards website, including information on upcoming workshops, recordings, and resources, and to join our newsletter, right? The newsletter link is still there, Andy, if people want to get updated and not miss a Chart Chat in the future.
Yeah.
So with that brings us to the end of Chart Chat today. We hope you'll join us for the after party. You can go to bigpic.me/after, which is where you'll find a quick Zoom pop-up. We'll hop in the Zoom room, not recorded, just to go ahead and let us all hang out together. Bring your charts that you find confusing and come share your thoughts on the New York Times piece and what else you're thinking about top of your mind in the data viz world. With that, we will go ahead and we will wrap up Chart Chat today. The link to the after party is down below in the chat box, so feel free to just click there. But we'll go ahead and sign off for Chart Chat. We will not be having another Chart Chat in March. This was March. And so please join us in person at the Tableau conference in April. And we will look forward to seeing folks again on our virtual stream starting up again in May. With that, farewell, and we'll see you at the after party.
Bye, everybody.